Okay.
You have to stay between that or you're off camera. Those are my restrictions.
Okay. Are we live? All right. Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming today to join us to talk about our new way to do billing and to work with providers and county boards. This is a training about the monthly rate calculator. The monthly rate calculator sits inside of MSS. That's our application that we use to project costs for all of our waiver services. Primarily, we're going to talk about the IA waiver and folks that live in congregate sites. We did a training in person with members of the Ohio Association of County Boards and with providers that are members of OPRA. And we did a training on January 15th that included about 400 people. And so we got a lot of questions about how we do things now and how this will change. So there's a couple things at the beginning of this training we want to make sure that we say on the outset that we want you to remember that the monthly rate calculator, we now look at a month. We plan for 365 days, the span of the waiver, and we look at a month. Our daily billing unit is arrived at by that monthly calculation. And it's based on the premise that a person resides in a site. They remain in a site and they're a resident of that site. So some of the questions that we got were related to, what if this person goes to a nursing facility or an ICF, and this is a daily billing unit? What if the person is incarcerated or goes to the hospital? So we're going to talk you through those examples, but what we want you to know on the front end is we had some concerns about how this system is set up. So we had a conversation with the Ohio Department of Medicaid and with our CMS representative. And some of the things that we talked about, Jessica participated in this meeting, and it was on February 8th. And you guys that signed up, registered for this training, you will receive in an email a copy of this information. We wanted to share it publicly. So what this says is that MRC is valid. It's a good way to do billing. It's a good way to project costs. ODM supports it. CMS supports it. We do have a way to make sure that we don't bill on days where people are in nursing facilities and in ICFs, but there are some days in there that people may be incarcerated or that they may be at a hospital, and we submit a daily billing unit claim, right? And that's very different from what we've done before. We got some feedback from stakeholders, and they said, but wait a second, your amendment for this waiver says hospitalizations, nursing facilities, ICFs, incarceration, you can't bill Medicaid on those. So we've worked that out, and we've reviewed this with CMS, and we've reviewed it with the Ohio Department of Medicaid, and they believe our amendment is still appropriate and it's still approved, and this is a good method. So we want to say that on the before we even get into how we're going to train you and how we want to implement this. So let's just start out with what this calculator does. So when you get into this work and you start to work in MSS, you're going to find out that very little has changed about where you push buttons and how you project, that sorts of thing. This is a different philosophy, right? It's built completely on the premise that providers and boards, teams work together and they plan well, right? So we want to make sure that we do some good, accurate planning. So what's changing? The monthly rate calculator, it's going to replace DRA. Once we get those folks that are in DRA sites moved over to MRC sites, DRA will no longer exist. So we started that process January 1 of 2019, and what we've said to the field is you have until January 1st of 2020 to establish a date to get those existing sites moved over to MRC. We've also said that if you build new sites, you don't build them in DRA, you build them in MRC. right? So we'll talk about details about how that transition will work. So DRA is different. MRC, it's a monthly rate, right? DRA required us to plan 365 days in the span. That's still consistent. MRC still requires us to do that. We won't plan month by month. We'll plan 365 days throughout the waiver span, but it breaks it down based on the hours that are projected. It gives us a monthly breakdown. And the premise is this: as long as the provider provides within plus or minus 3% of those hours that we projected, they get that monthly payment. I mentioned this before, all DRA sites have to have a transition date by January 2020. It doesn't mean that they have to be transitioned by 2020, January 1 of 2020. It means that we have to have a projected date by then. So we're going to, and Jessica is going to lead this team. We've established a small work group with some providers and some county boards to start to work on these sites and say, what does this look like? How is this different philosophically? How do we plan differently? How do we make sure CPT is correct? And how do providers start to bill? So they're going to work on some of those. And as we go and we proceed, we still want to say, let's designate those sites, what date you're going to transition by January 1, 2020. And we may need to look at when those sites will actually transition. It's a requirement of the daily billing unit of the rule, and it's a requirement of MRC. Boards have to work with providers. You have to work collaboratively. Teams have to work collaboratively to plan and get a correct CPT in place. They also have to collaborate to make sure that transition date is agreeable. I think we've gotten a couple, maybe 2 or 3, where boards have kind of gone into sites and looked and said, let's flip this on this date. And then said, oops, wait a second, we didn't mean to enter that date. They call the department and we adjust that date for them because they haven't had a conversation with the provider and no team meeting has happened to really transition that date. But it has to be an agreeable date by both parties. MRC applies to people that share homemaker personal care, and that it's provided by an agency. We currently have about 10,000 people, 10,144, when we created this PowerPoint, that live in 3,475 DRA sites. They're served by 544 providers. So this is a big haul to change for boards to work with providers with these sites and get them transitioned over to MRC. It doesn't apply to shared living sites. It doesn't apply to shared services where there's independent providers involved. And it doesn't apply to people that share services but don't share a residence. The secondary providers that we have associated with those folks that we receive shared living, that HPC provider would still bill 15-minute units. Shared living would still be that daily billing unit. And I think there's a note here that says we don't do MRC for people who live alone and maybe share some HPC services with a neighbor or a friend that they don't reside with, but it's provided by an agency. So think about congregate sites, folks that share a residence, they share services, and it's provided by agency providers. The reason why this is changing is that boards, providers spend an enormous amount of time. They have designated staff that do nothing but adjust CPT, right? So SSAs will go out in the field and they'll have a few little tweaks to the cost projection, and then they either make the change or there's somebody in a unit that does the change, right? And so we make these non-necessary changes to CPT over small increments of hours and units, and it really doesn't serve a purpose. So we're wasting a lot of administrative time. Boards and providers came to the department and said, we got to figure something out because this administrative burden is large. We have to figure out a way to develop a projection and billing system that's effective and doesn't create this kind of unnecessary burden. So we started to look at this. I want to say April of 2017 is what our first initial look at this. And we pulled data from fiscal year 12 through 16. We looked at 5 years of data, 3,400 sites, and what we found is that an enormous amount of changes to cost projection. Many, many different versions. And when we looked at them closely, literally they were dollars and units. So when you think about what it takes to go in and finalize, to create a schedule and to finalize a version and authorize it, it's an enormous amount of administrative work for this little teeny tiny change. We didn't see enormous changes. And then at the end, what we started with 25 versions ago didn't look that different than what we ended up with. And we had created a lot of chaos in between about backing out DRA, changing, boards would make changes, providers weren't aware. So it was kind of messy. So this is the data that we used, and this is the graph. And you'll notice when we get farther with the explanation of MRC, we use that 3% difference. If you're 3% below, you're 3% over, that area. This is what we saw overall, is there's not much difference. It's either going to go 3% lower or it's going to go 3% over on those hours, those units and hours that are projected. But it usually doesn't fall out of there. We're not seeing great differences. So that's where we came up with our margin. The administrative cost associated, what we found out too is it had no value to the person that we served. We only created a burden for the county board staff and the provider staff. It didn't serve the person well at all. It didn't change the quality of services they received. They still got the services that they needed. It didn't improve it. It didn't do anything. So it added no quality to any of that. So as we sat down and started to work with providers and boards, we came back to this same thing. Providers felt nickeled and dimed. Boards felt nickeled and dimed about all of these changes. And so we said, nobody's notified. So providers might need to provide additional services because it's a health and welfare issue and people need services, and boards didn't make those changes. Or boards did an assessment and needed changes, but they never got to the authorizing part. So the money was never there and the projection was never done. And it's after the fact. And then we had to go back and adjust DRA. So we saw lots of issues with how it currently is. Jess is going to talk to you about planning. But again, I want to make sure that you guys understand that it is a monthly rate. We separated it into daily billing units. One, so providers could either bill on a monthly, they could bill monthly or they could bill day by day, weekly, how they do now. We wanted to maintain that cash flow. But please look at this from a monthly projection perspective. And we also want you guys to understand this is a philosophical change, and it is very much about accurate, well-done, person-centered planning.
So between the three of us, me, Amy, and Brian, you're going to hear a lot of the repetitiveness of going over good planning, good solid communication, because that's what MRC is about. We've got to have, the good planning, the good communication between providers and county boards. And we got to make it simple. We got to get back to the basics, go back to elementary and start from the beginning and work our way back up. We get it. There's a fear. There's always a fear when it comes to change. We're moving the cheese. If you've ever read that book, it's about these mice, and they go one way to their cheese, and then somebody moves it, now they have to turn a different way, and they have to figure out how to make that turn. Everybody gets it. Everybody has that one fear, and we just got to get over that hurdle just to try it. Everybody, I guarantee you, in every county has one site that has a predictability of this is what happens all the time. It's that one easy site where those county boards, those providers can dip their toe into this, say, let's transition this easy site because we know every day that Brian, Jessica, and Amy do the same routine. It doesn't change. So start with that site. Start with that site and make that change, make that leap to say, you know what, let's start, let's get it going, let's see what we can do with this. I always say in the office that everything's fixable. Regardless of what happens, it's fixable somehow. It may take some work, but we can fix it. So if we find that there's a mistake, if we find that there has been a mistake, let us know. We can fix it. We can work with it. But planning is the key. So county boards, we're not changing the way CPT is supposed to be planned. You're still planning a 12-month waiver span. All existing rules about the eligibility add-ons and the request for prior authorizations will still apply. So you're still requesting that prior authorization prior to the waiver span ending when you know that individual's DDP range is going to be over their expected amount. At authorization, the new daily billing unit, or DBU, is determined taking those on-site, on-call, and HPC hours for each person in the calendar month and dividing that total number of service dates in that month. So simple. How many hours does Jessica need? How many days in the month? Divide it, and that's what our DBU amounts to. Data service, and Amy stressed this a lot. Data service is the individual a resident of the home? If the individual is a resident of the home, that is a data service. When that individual leaves and goes and admits to an ICF or NIF, that is when that individual is now not a resident of the home. So and Brian will get into this a little later too, but in MRC, you're gonna see where you can say these are non-billable days. Those are non-billable days that you have to acknowledge within that month when you know Jessica or Brian or anybody is in a nursing home or ICF and is admitted for non-respite services. So just a quick example, your HPC and on-site on-call for March, including units projected on the calendar and unscheduled, let's say are $4,100. The total dates of service in March are 31. You take the 4,100 divided by 31, your 132.26 is your daily billing unit. No big math, no big magic. It's pretty simple. What are your costs? How many days in that month? And here's your DBU. Now, obviously, as we get into this, we'll see where it'll adjust because you'll have those non-billable days. So it's important for each county board to project costs each month as accurately as possible. We know everything's not predictable. We know that there are going to be days where Jessica just refuses to get up and go anywhere just because she doesn't want to. We get that. We're hoping that that falls within that plus or minus that 3% threshold, where just because Jessica out of 31 days decides to stay home one day that she usually isn't, we should be within that plus or minus that 3%, and it shouldn't cause any alarms for any calculation redone or a redo on the CPT. So we're hoping that this gives you that breathing room to say, 31 days, one day, it's nothing. I don't need to go to the county board and say, hey, I need an adjustment. Consider a person's typical HPC usage patterns. Look at the adjustments based on history, holidays, and day services, programs, closures, and weekends. So, for example, I love the snow. I love every bit of it. Today was a little rough, but I love every bit of that snow. So when it comes to December, January, February, possibly into March, I'm going to stay home when there's some snow out there because I'm going to go out, I'm going to get my sledding done, I'm going to build my snowman. So there are going to be days where I'm going to look at you and go, I don't want to go to work. I want to stay home and let's go play in the snow. Those are going to be those atypical things that happen. So plan for them. But Jessica likes to go in the snow. So let's say, the day program, school is closed again for many of the kids today. This is going to happen. What months it's predicted to happen in. Plan for those. So you can look at history months across your CPTs in the past and look to say, in January we noticed that this day program, it closed a few times here and there in the summertime as soon as there was an inch of snow on. So let's predict that there's a few days where we're going to say, for a few extra days this month, we're going to give you a few extra hours. And let's go from there. Other anticipated change to direct service hours is Say you know Jessica every summer goes on vacation with her family. Plan for that. You know that's happening. You know that happens every year. So good planning. Get it into the unscheduled services. Let everybody know that this is what's going to happen. These typical patterns also should be applied in the calendar. Planned absences are accounted in cost projection. The lower cost resulting from the decreased amount of on-site on-call and HPC needed in that month will spread across all days of service. So we're going to see a quick example here. So typically, planned absences on the daily bill unit and what it does. So Brent's typical pattern in a 31-day month cost of $4,100 is the 132.26 DBU. But in July, he will not need anything for 7 days because he's going on vacation with his family. So his cost now become the $31.90 because it is reflected that for a whole week, a provider is not going to need to provide him services. So we adjust for that. That gets adjusted. But it's still spread over 31 days because he is still a resident of the home. He is not living in the home, but there are services on behalf of. Their services still need to be done for the other 2 individuals or 3 individuals that are living in that home that require Brent's residence to continue on. So Brent will be back. It's not that he's not ever coming back. So he's still that resident, so it's still a data service. We're still spread over 31 days. Everybody's still going to get that cost projected money for that month. As much as possible, unscheduled time should always be applied in the month of which it's expected to use. This is a big philosophical difference between DRA and MRC. So, for example, Jessica, who lives in Northeast Ohio, loves the snow. And it looks like during December, January, and February, the SSA confirms that because of winter weather, Jessica typically uses about 40 extra additional units of HPC because she's going to go out there and play. She's not going. She wants to go enjoy that snow while she's got it and then come in and be done for it. Because there's no consistent schedule identified with the extra units, the SSA can apply them to the schedule on the calendar. We're not changing that. We know there's unscheduled stuff. Put it on the calendar like you've always done, and we'll apply it to that month. The big difference here is it's applied to that month. It's not applied over a span of 12 months like it is today in DRA. So when these units are entered for unscheduled span, rather than by month, all unscheduled units will be distributed equally across the 12 months. That means unscheduled time applies a month in which that is not needed, and it makes it appear higher than the under-delivered the services. So today's DRA world, I need 40 extra hours for the month of January. But what today's DRA world does is it spreads it over 12 months. So it may say then I only get 10 extra hours in the month of January. Well, when I go to provide services, it's going to look like I've over-delivered because I'm still going to provide 40 extra hours in the month of January. But we've only applied 10 because DRA takes that over 12 months. So now we're saying we're going to apply 40 extra hours to the month of January, period. So that means in February, when you only give your 300 hours, that's it, 300 hours. It's not 310 because we've taken the 40 to spread it across. Unscheduled time not applied to a month in which it is needed, causing the provider to deliver more units than authorized. So we talked about a little bit about that. We're going to see, so here's typical DRA. So for the months of January, so we have 300 hours up on the schedule on the calendar. So there are 120 hours of unscheduled HPC for on-site on-call services across the entire span. This requires an additional 10 hours to the monthly projections. So as you can see, we've got January, February, March. So it took it that 120 hours and it spread it across. If you look clear over to the far left, are you within that plus or minus 3% range? It's going to say no because in January, your actual hours were still 340. So we still didn't give you still didn't have all those hours that you needed to provide the correct 340 hours that needed to be delivered, even though we projected 310 because it took it and spread it across. So it's still going to look like you over-delivered. It's still going to look like we didn't plan for it, and that could cause other issues. So if you look, though, on the month of April, well, March, we only have 300 hours instead of the 310 that projected. So now it looks like we've underutilized the hours for services for that individual, which we really didn't. We know you didn't. You provided the actual hours that needed for that month because we knew it spread that 120 out over. What MRC does now is takes that And it is now per month. So for January, February, and down here in December, we know there's 40 extra hours for those months. We apply them in that month. And are we within that plus or minus 3% now? Look at that. That column is now yes. Because we accurately planned and projected that Jessica, for the month of January, February, and December, needed 40 extra hours. We didn't need 10 hours plus whatever additional hours because it took it and spread it around. So now we are accurately projecting what's projected in the actual hours. So it now shows that a provider is providing actual services in correct hours to an individual in the home. Once cost projections are entered, the site should be shared with the provider for review. Nothing's changing there. The big change you'll see, and you'll see some additional slides that have some of the screenshots of the new MRC, is that the projected and the actuals are on the same page now. So you don't have to go from one to the other to see a county board provider. Both county board and provider can see the same stuff. Nothing's different. Like, they can see it all. They don't have to go anywhere else different. Nobody has to send somebody something because they can't see it. It's right there for both of you. If the total cost exceeds a person's DDP range, the funding range, submit a prior authorization. Nothing's changing there. So after the cost projections are finalized and no changes should be made, we want to talk about when should they be made? When is a change in my cost projection necessary? So some of those examples are when a person moves to or from the site, a person living at the site starts or stops a day program, or circumstances cause an increase or decrease of more than 3% in the hours of HPC provided at the site during the calendar month. So these are examples of, could be of, I'll hit a button. When the person is no longer residing in a home, so you have to move them out. When a person decides they no longer live with the individuals they live with, so you move them out. When a person decides they want to no longer go to day programming, so now they're home more, so their hours are going to increase. So these are some of the examples when you are going to need to make a cost projection change. These are the examples that you are going to need to do and communicate to the county boards to say, hey, something is about to change in Jessica's schedule, and we need to plan for it now. It's imperative for the team members to communicate changes in the person's service needs in a timely manner. So as soon as you know that Jessica is going to be home because she's decided on February 27th that she's retiring, I'm done working, I don't want to do it anymore, you know about it now. So let's plan for it now. Let's not wait. Let's get the planning done because we know there's going to be cost projection changes because we're going to go over that 3%. So let's re-cost project, let's re-plan, and let's start those talks. So when a significant change occurs for one or more people in the home that requires additional direct service, the team may agree to make the adjustment proactively. So we no longer need to wait. We don't want to wait. We know what's going to happen. Let's do that good, simple planning and do it smartly. Waiting for the provider to enter actual services to see what hours are needed, instead of waiting for that. So for example, Bill, he lives with his friends at 234 State Street. On December 13th, Bill fell and broke his hip. We know Bill is going to the hospital. We know Bill is going to need surgery. We know all this now. We know that when he goes to that nursing home, he's going to need at least a month of rehab. We know now. So let's plan now. Let's get back together with the providers and say, this is what's going to happen. We need to re-cost project. We need to re-plan that Bill will now be out of the home for a while. And let's get these services re-planned and the DBU recalculated so that we have an accurate projection of what this home is going to be, so that a provider can pay and get billed without all the administrative burden of making several changes to get there. We know it's going to happen. So the SSA can update the CPT to reflect Bill being out of the home for the rest of December or the first week of January. We also heard discussion of, it can be complicated to move a person in and out of a home. And Brian will go into this a little further with some of the technical pieces. So adjust the scheduling. So go into your HPC schedule and adjust some of your scheduling there. It's not necessary all the time to move a person in and out of home. We know Bill's going to come back. We just know right now for the month of March, he's not going to be there because he's going to be in a nursing home getting care. So build a new schedule, readjust that way instead of moving somebody out, moving somebody back in, and doing all that administrative work there. Retroactive changes for CPT are permitted for up to 2 months. For example, a provider can request additional hours for January of 2019 if they provide documentation to the county board regarding the person's need for additional hours. The last date the retroactive change will be permitted is March 31st. The CPT must be adjusted whenever a provider produces documentation for a county board that one or more people in the home require additional direct service support hours. So what that means is today is the end, we're getting to the end of February here. So a provider has 30 days to input those actual hours. That doesn't mean a provider has 30 days to bill. That still means you have 365 days to bill. What it means is you need to put in your actuals. What did you really work and what hours were really served to those individuals in that home? You have 30 days to put those in. You can put those in however you've always put them in, by a week, by a day, by the whole month span. That's completely up to you. We're not changing the way that is done for a provider. Whenever they need their money, it's there. But what it means is when a change comes, so when a provider actually enters those actuals, you will be able to see right away what your hours, what that 3% range is for those hours. So you're going to be able to see that if I have 100 hours, my plus or minus 3%, I'm going to see the 97% to the 104%. So I know if I put in my actuals and I'm at 105 hours, what did I do first? Did I over-deliver? Do I have my documentation in a row that says, yes, I needed to over-deliver that hour? And is that hour even worth the administrative burden to go back and change CPT? Is it worth 5 cents? Is it worth $5? That's up to you guys. That's up to you guys to determine that. If I'm over, is it worth it for me to go back and do that extra 2 cents that I'm going to make? Or is it $10 I'm going to make and yeah, it's worth it, but I have the documentation that says Jessica was home these extra few days. So work with this, those communication works. From the time the provider gets done, then the county board has 30 days to make that request as well. So they have 30 days to go in there, adjust CPT costs if they need it, and collect that documentation and have that communication with the provider. So in actuality, you have 60 days to get a retroactive change done. We know that if for some reason something happens, we're here, you call us up, you send us the information through MSS support, we can review if it's past a 60-day. Brian will go into a little further of that as well. But these are some of the things you're going to have to look at. These are the things that you need to communicate with to the providers. The providers need to make sure they're communicating to you. Documentation is important. We'll go through some of the frequently asked questions towards the end here, and we'll discuss some of that documentation that you're looking for. But it's all important to make this MRC work simplistically for you and to take that burden of administration cost off everyone. So I'm going to hand this over to Brian. He's going to kind of talk us through the technical pieces of how it works and all that good fun stuff.
I think I'm going to slow down a little bit. So like Jessica said, we're trying to plan in month increments. When we say month, we're basically talking the span of no more than a month. So if my waiver span starts in the middle of the month, I'm going to have a partial at the beginning of my year and then month and a partial at the end. And we'll apply the same kind of process of figuring out what the DBU is based on the number of days in that span. Okay, so we're going to look at the authorization in MRC, and we'll automatically sort each person's direct service cost for the calendar year. It's going to include all those on behalf of ours. When we move through a cost projection of finalization, move it on to authorization, it'll come into MRC. And when we authorize, it's going to feed right away, and MRC is going to decide is everybody's stuff there to move forward. So Jessica kind of indicated that, Jessica indicated that we're going to go ahead and be able to update those as we go forward. We only have 60 days to get a change in there, otherwise it has to come through us. So this is what I'm talking about with, if I have my month start in the middle, we end up with 2 spans. We end up with, instead of 12 months, we end up with 2 partials, one at the beginning, one at the end. Let me move forward. How do we calculate the DBU? So again, we got how we calculate it for a person. So Jessica went over that. So when we do it for a group, so in this case, we have a site. I know the numbers are kind of low. It's just to give us the example. So we've got $3,000 projected in this site across everybody. The hours are 500 hours. The hourly rate is $6 an hour. We're not really going to pay much attention to the $6 an hour at first, but we're going to go through and say, we know that person A, what they contributed was 60%, so it's 1,800. Person B, person C. So we divide that and we get by 31 days because, or was it 30 days? 30 days, sorry, we're in June. So we divide that by 30 and you can see we get what each person's DBU is. Pretty simple. And that is the DBU that you're going to get as long as you provide within the 3% above or below the hours projected. So when a enrolled on the IO, Mary shares services with someone on the level 1 or somebody who does local service, gets funded through local services. Those still have to be in the MRC. Just like the DRA, we need to know those percentages of the cost that each person brings to the table so we know how to apportion things out correctly. Okay, that really hasn't changed. An example of what we have in MRC right now. These are screenshots from the system itself. This is going to be the first page that you land on. Now, what's going to happen here is you can see that we can say that the CPTs are all complete, so those are all good. Here's each person's contributions, what their costs are, so this is what their DBU, and this is all based on the projected. So we need to know that for each of the people, whether they're in level 1 or whether they're receiving services funded locally. Now, of course, level 1 and local funded, level 1 is going to have to be billed in the 15-minute unit. Local funded, we don't care how you bill that other entity or what you bill them, but we need to make sure that things are apportioned out correctly here, and we do that as well. In the site, you can see the total projected hours. We'll show you the range. Right now, nothing's been entered, so everything is 0. Okay? That is going to be the same for the county board and the provider. So in MRC, we'll determine what the DBU is for each day, like we've shown, and then we'll figure that out by using the number of days in that span or month. The flat rate will be billed by the provider until the end of the month. So if you are putting your actuals in week by week, really it's very similar to the DRA now. You go in, you tell us the dates, you go ahead and tell us how many hours. If there's competency, you'll put how many of those hours were competency. We'll go ahead and work it all out. Up until the end of the month. So if you're doing week by week, you're going to get paid what that DBU, calculated DBU is. Okay? At the end of the month, that's when we'll look at, did you meet your 3% threshold? So again, we're going to go every day that the person is a resident of the home, and they're not in an ICF or a nursing facility, then we get to include those days. There is going to be a way for you to, we'll show you some screenshots of that, a way to go ahead and open up and say, this person was not here on this day, or we couldn't bill on this day, it was an unbillable day. So that we can use that in our calculations. When somebody exceeds the Medicaid maximum of 508.30 in a month, so I'm not sure how many people have experienced that in the current DRA, but we will know right away if you looked at that slide. Let me go back a couple, if it'll let me. Are they exceeding the max DBU for that month? It'll tell you right away. We know based on the calculated amounts if they're over a 508.30. So if you are exceeding that, we'll know right at the beginning. The counties can request an exemption month by month, and they can know ahead of time, and it'll allow them, you guys, to go back to and look and say, hey, did we miss something with scheduling, or is it really supposed to be up in this month or not? Again, you always report those exemptions the way we always have. You send them to MSS support, you tell us the name of the site, the cost projection tool, the start date that you want of the exemption, and you can request, if you've got months interspersed throughout the year, you can request them all at the same time and just tell us what months. MRC, like I said, can be submitted by month, but you have to be submitted we can only go 6 days retroactive. So say you put that in there and you see that you have those totals, but you're like, maybe I won't go over the 50830. Well, you're gonna need to look at, if you don't get it in on time, we can only go 60 days back. So if you need that exemption to go back to March and you're submitting it in June, we're out of luck. We usually make the decision within 30 days of receiving that, so you have to have all that information into us and complete for us to actually process that exemption. That's really not any different than what we do now. The difference is the fact that we can do month by month now and we don't do it by the whole year. What we wanted to also call out, if you're going to do an exemption and you're not going to do the DBU, the MRC that month, that site falls under the EVV qualifications that are coming out. So if you're doing 15-minute units, you have to do EVV. If you're doing the daily billing unit, that was exempt. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Some minor fluctuation in service hours, we know that they're going to happen. Small changes, but like we said before, usually they fall within that 3%. If we've done some good planning, we really look at each month, and we put the hours in the month under unscheduled and not in a span so that it gets prorated across months. And we say, hey, these are the actual hours for the month. Then if we do some good planning, we should be pretty much on the mark, and that 3% should work. This, we hope, will allow for more consistent funding for county board or for providers. So you can know, hey, this is what I've got, and make sure if I'm providing those hours, then I should know that that's a good steady funding stream for me. Okay. Again, we're allowing you 30 days to enter those actuals. Not to actually bill them, but to enter them. Why? Because we're giving you 30 days to enter, and at that point, you're going to check a box, say, this is complete, do my calculations. If it's within the 3%, what you've billed is all the same, you bill the rest of them, you're going to be done. If you are above, we're going to pay you what was projected, but then you've got 30 days to get with the county board and get a different cost projection in to update those. If it goes beyond that, we do have the administrative ability to go back further because we know nothing is perfect out there. But we're going to be looking at those, and we're going to have some real reasons. If it's, oh yeah, we didn't think about it until after the fact, and now we want it to change. It's like, you know, where was the conversation before that? What happened? We're going to ask for those things because we really want people to be proactive. This is about being proactive and trying to deal with those issues prior rather than later. If you have a stable staffing pattern in which one of the people living there experiences a lot of frequent changes, then you may want to make sure that you're not only accounting for that each month in unscheduled or on calendar, but if you're doing that in unscheduled, we're going to ask you to do that in month spans. Okay? Here's an example of what happens if the provider is going to be under the DBU, I believe. Let's see. So so this is the example I already went through. It's within the margin. At the end, the 300 hours you've provided, 291, you're within the hours, you get paid the whole amount. When you check the box at the end of the month, what it'll do is say, hey, you're within. You can create a bill file for the whole month, and you can upload that bill file, and if there were adjustments because you had somebody that you couldn't bill for a day, it'll do all those adjustments at the end of the month. It'll bill the next days, and you can take care of all of that at one fell swoop. We can talk more about the bill file later. So if I have someone who, if you deliver over, like I said, if you deliver over the hours, and this is an example, you're still going to get what was projected. So if you provide 309 hours when you're supposed to provide 300, you're going to be within or outside that 3 margin, but we're going to say, you know what, we're going to pay you what we projected. That way you get money coming in, and you get to make that decision. If you see that, okay, if I go ahead and claim whatever hours those are, and I'm going to get $100, but I have to have this person and this person run around and deal with the county board, and by the end of it, I've used more administrative time for somebody running this down and getting all the information together and doing this. Is it really worth it for that in that 1 month? That's going to be up to you as a provider to make that decision. It may be you just want to say, hey, this month I'm not going to worry about it. Let's see what happens next month. It could be the fact that, you know what, I was right at the lower end of that 3% the last 3 months. I'm a little over this month. Hey, I'm okay with a steady funding stream. So we want you to think about all of those things. So the MRC will generate an alert to the agency and the county board and tell you, hey, is this site over or under by less percent, or is it by 3%, or is it within the margin? So an example of that, have RMS, we just picked out any random provider. You provide 959 hours for Mary, Harry, and Barry. And in the month of February, when entering their last actuals for the month, they click the box, the total number of hours delivered by RMS was 894. They're 4% less. So how is this going to work? We're 4% below. What is the system going to do? So the system is going to go back, and we have that hourly rate. Well, this was the actuals. We have the hourly rate. We're going to use that hourly rate times, in this case, the 894 hours that you provided. So we get a new monthly total. So if the monthly total we had was, say, $5,000, and we do this, and now it's $480 or $4,080, something like that, we're going to take that new total, divide it by the original percentages. Remember on the one slide we had the percentages of somebody had 65% and so on. We're going to take that new total, divide it by the percentage of people that each person brought to the original total, and then we're going to divide it by the number of days that you have in that span, and it's going to give you an adjusted DBU. What you're going to see is if that DBU is adjusted, it's going to show you on the front page, but here's how we're going to know to do that check. When you get done, in this case, we've entered everything by week. When you're all done with these, and notice the bill files there, that's a bill file for this week, that's the bill file for that week. So you're billing all along. Now you're done. You check the box. When you check the box, it's going to do the calculation and say, are your hours within the range? If they're not, and they're below, we'll do the root calculations. We're going to show you an alert if you're above or below, and there'll be an alert out this side so you can see what it is, but you'll also get the pop-up. And then you'll be able to see on the front page what those base daily billing units have been adjusted to. It will not include your competency hours, but it will include the base for that, what the DBU was. So it's the new adjusted DBU. We don't go back in CPT. We don't go ahead and do a bunch of other calculations to find something else. We use what we had before. Let's ratchet it down to a reasonable amount. If your hourly rate was whatever that hourly rate was, we're going to use that with the new total for the month in the site. Do those percentages, get you a new DBU. When you have the bill file up here for the month, that'll include the final bill file that you'll do at the end of the month. And if there were any adjustments for missing days, stuff like that, that'll all be in that bill file. It will also zero out claims. So say when I was doing things the first week, I included everybody's name, and then I came back in later and realized somebody was in a nursing home a day or two, and I take that out. At the end of the month, if we have that in, it'll take and give me a zero out claim. You won't have to manually go into the system and zero out that claim for that day. Here is where I'm going to add the actual spans. I'm going to click that. It'll pop up the box just like we do in DRA. Give me a begin date, give me an end date. Give me a number of hours. Give me if there's any competency. Once you save it, it'll be saved here. Okay? If you have non-billable days, you'll click here, it'll pop up a calendar. You choose a person from the top, pick out the calendar day, put an X on it, and we know that that is not a billable day. Here's a picture of where we have an alert. So if that alert will stay there, you'll also get a pop-up as soon as you check that box if you're over or under. But that alert will stay there so you can find out what it is and how over or under you are. And it'll stay there until you choose to edit one of these. Once you hit edit, the checkbox comes unchecked. Then when you get that done again and you check the box again telling us, oh, I'm done now. Even before I was done, but I made changes, I'm done again. We'll do the recalculation and you'll either clear the alert or you'll have an alert. It'll just say different information. Here's a pop-up when you check the box over here. Here is what the pop-up looks like. It tells you what your projected hours, your range are, the actual hours you provided, whether you're above or below in the 3%. And gives you that quick little, hey, this is what it is and this is what we're doing. That alert, like I said, once you close box, it'll stay here until you open up and change some of the data. We'll uncheck the box because that's telling us you need to finish your edits and tell us to do that check again. So I think we talked a little bit about some of the recalculations, but we probably will go over some of it again. So you at authorization, MRC will get those details from everybody's plans. When they go right to MRC, MRC will look at those months and compare, and when they determine that they have all the information that they need, then it'll be marked complete and you'll be able to start putting actuals. And real quick, divide each person's cost by the number of days of service for that person. So again, if I have one person who's out 5 days, well, once I figure out what their percentage is, we're going to divide it across the days that you can bill. Remember, we came from this in a path of trying to say this is a monthly rate. So we wanted to actually try to get a monthly rate, but we also heard that a lot of the providers out there needed to bill weekly. They needed to get that revenue service. So this is essentially a monthly rate that we figured out how to break across several days so you can bill a daily billing unit. We already had the daily billing unit in place, similar, and it's the same kind of idea as DRA. The biggest change is you're now telling us days you can't bill. Some examples, again, we'll just walk through them. In June, we had $3,000. Projected hours for June were 500. Again, our $6 hourly rate. We actually provided 400, 25, that's 600, 15, for person C, that's 360. Again, divided by 30 days, we got their new adjusted daily rates. Does that sound pretty simple? Try to make it kind of easy to go follow some of the math. So when you're actually providing within or more than 3 hours, we're going to have you paid what we already agreed on. But again, if you need to take it back to the county board, you're going to have to provide some kind of written request with documentation. So in other words, you can't just go back to the county board and pulling out of some things from the past, but, oh yeah, we had an extra staff training in there, so we included those in the hours in the DRA. That wasn't what was agreed to. Or we had an extra staff that wasn't needed in another home, so we just brought them over here. That wasn't what was agreed to. So it has to be a reason that the individual needed the additional supports. And it was something that would be covered through the ISP. So you say they had 3 extra doctor's appointments, a couple that weren't planned, and that's what put them over on the hours. That would be something that show that you had the doctor's appointments. You normally don't have that many. You know, they didn't plan for them. Okay, you only planned for 1, you didn't plan for 3.
There's no form or anything, is there?
We don't have a form. That's going to be working with your county board to see when you bring a written, what way do they want you to bring that written explanation? Is it going to be an email with it spelled out and some, you know, what kind of documentation to support? Say, yeah, here's the 3 doctor's appointments. I have the consults or whatever the afterwards to show that we went to these, and you know, we don't have that in the schedules. Something like that if you have that. Okay, and it's going to really, the problem is trying to get too prescribed with that is going to always, it's never going to cover every single situation out there. We always know, as soon as we try to say, oh, but this is how it should work, somebody comes up with well, here's that 2 or 3% instance where it doesn't cover. Okay? And if these changes aren't temporary, so say we're in the middle of the month and we realize that is coming up and we have those extra hours and we say, well, but we might be close. We find that we're over, but we also find out because of a new diagnosis, he's going to have 3 more doctor's appointments the next several months. Bring that up so you can go ahead and be proactive about those months and get those changed. We're also talking not to worry about those little things such as, oh, somebody's getting off a half an hour early, they're getting home from the day, whatever they go during the day, half an hour early for a few weeks. Hopefully those are the things that people would come and tell us and say, we're doing a CPT because this week the bus is running differently and we needed that half an hour more 5 days of this week. We knew we had it in the CPT. And in the end, what was happening is, if you look at what we authorized at the beginning of the year and 6 or 7 authorizations later, what was billed is still underneath the amount that you approved at the beginning of the year. A lot of work for very little bang for the buck, very little effort, or I should say, a difference to the individual. Another example for RMS. You submitted 3 out of 4 weeks of billing. During the 4th week, they determined that they have provided additional 5 hours of service to 1 person. The average of 3.5 in total hours projected in the site. So Mary has a payment of 89 for the additional 5 hours. This is trying to get you to say, so if you see that you have some hours, what are those worth? If you have additional 5 hours, how much are you going to get for those additional 5 hours? Is that worth going and doing all that work? So provider determines that the cost associated with updating the CPT and resubmission, is more than $89. So by the time you pay this staff and this staff for 3 hours of time here, 4 hours of time there. Then you meet with the county board, you gotta pay for those hours. So how much time did you spend in staff time? If that's more than $100, is it really worth taking all that time to get that $100, or better off to say, hey, we're gonna skip this month and we're gonna see, make sure this isn't a trend. So when you have supporting and documentation that indicates an increase in hours, the board shall, if you bring it to them and you show that that is an increase, then the board shall revise the plan within 30 days. So in other words, we give you 30 days to put your stuff in, 30 days for the county board to revise if there's going to be a revision. We want things to be in a timely manner. We figured that 60 days was a reasonable amount of time to try to get that done. We know that we have the workaround, but we want things to stay steady. And remember in the cost projections for DRA, county boards would come through and put stuff through, and we'd hear providers say, we didn't know that, we didn't know anything about that. Or, wait a minute, this is something I asked about 4 months ago, why is it happening now? So every time they do that, providers, you well know that you're going to have to bill and rebill costs because it changes it for that whole site cost band, which could be up to a year. And if they do 5 changes in a 6-month span, you've rebilled. How do you keep up with what am I supposed to have billed? Did I really get paid the right amount? Those are the things that hopefully we can get rid of. If we keep this to a 60-day amount of time, you've dealt with it, it's done, you get your update, and you're not going back 6 months and having to rebill. Now, if you missed putting in some hours or something like that and you put them back in, that's kind of back on the provider. You need to make sure you're getting those timesheets in a timely manner, but try to keep things proactive rather than get caught in the past like that. Again, if you want to send an email to MSS support because you're having any issues with anything, tell us the name of the site, the start date of any adjustments. So if this is going to go on 60 days, we're telling the providers, send us this to MSS support. Tell us what site it is, what months you're changing, why it wasn't adjusted within the 60-day period. We can go ahead and we're going to have an internal review process, and then we can, if it's warranted, go ahead and put that in. We just don't want it to be, we want people to stay in that 60-day period. So we don't want this to be something that people are constantly coming to us saying, oh, we missed our 60-day window. You know, well, why did you miss your 60-day window? Well, because we didn't talk, or because this person was on vacation and nobody picked up their caseload, or stuff like that. That needs to be addressed. So, you know, we'll consider those things when they come to us outside of the 60 days. And again, this is something new. As we go on and get more data and everything else, some of this, we'll see if there needs to be any changes or tweaks. But right now, this is what we're doing, and this is how we're asking you to report that to us. So this is a picture. Remember I told you you're going to tell us what days are non-billable days. So here's an example of that pop-up calendar that I showed you on the screen before. So any day, when you hit that one link I showed you, here's your calendar going to pop up. This is where you're going to select which individual from the site. So you only got a list from the site. You're going to move through December, January, February, just by clicking the months. When you put a check on the day, when at the end of the month, when we look at that month, we're not going to consider that day in that monthly day total. So like that example we had somewhere where we had somebody, or we had the example of everybody recalculating, and we divided that total by 30 days for each person. Well, one person who wasn't there in January, say in this case, we wouldn't use 31 days, we'd use 30. So your DBU would be spread across the other days for that month because you couldn't bill for it on the 8th. So that means you still get that monthly total. You still get it as long as you stay within the 3% margin. And if you're without, or if you're outside of the 3% margin, and we give you a new monthly total for each individual, you still get that. It just is divided against fewer days if they weren't actually in the site, because they were in ICF or in a NIF. If they were still a resident of that site and they were on vacation with their parents, that should have been taken care of in the cost projection, so you know their dollars are going to be lower for that time, but you're just billing it for the whole month. So once providers entered all the actuals for the month, MRC will calculate the DBU and any person that was, we indicate for the nursing facility, I'm telling you how those are handled. We use the number of days in the month that are actually in that month. We take out any of the days that you can't bill from that total for that person, so we can just spread the cost through the other days of the month. At the end of the month, like I told you, we would give you that month DBU, the month bill file. In that bill file, we're going to include every day of the month. If you billed earlier and you had billed on a day when they really weren't able to be billed, that bill file will have a zero out line for you to take it out. You won't have to manually go in to MBS and do a zero out manually. It'll be in the bill file. We thought that was important to do that. And then basically at the end of the month, when the system does, you put all the information in and the system has done its job, we're going to give you one bill file to bill for that month that'll adjust anything that needs to be adjusted, and it'll take out any zeros, it'll do any of the rates that needs to be adjusted, and then you can be done with that month. You shouldn't have to rebill unless somebody comes back in, puts new hours, or we put a new cost projection in with that. If the total hours delivered is more than 3%, we're going through this again, then you're going to get what we originally calculated and said the DBU should be, and then you're going to have to come back in after a cost projection is done and we update cost. It'll uncheck the monthly box, so you'll have to go back in, check the box again for it to do all the new calculations, and it'll determine again if you're within the 3% or above or below. If the rates are new, then you can rebill by the month and you can adjust all those. Kind of talked about here how we go ahead and attribute those monthly costs. So it's really all the same thing. We're repeating ourselves a lot because we want people to understand. We're attributing the hours, the cost based on the hours delivered if we're under. We're going to get a new monthly cost. How we're going to attribute it to the individuals is based on how much percentage they already bring to the table for in the first place. Just take care of it that way, and then divide that new monthly cost for each person across the days. Again, if we're above, you can submit all the billing and you're going to get paid up to that DBU that we calculated. To get more than that, you're going to have to go back to the county. Hopefully that makes sense there. I know I've said it enough. Hopefully people understand. Frequently asked questions.
So before we get too far into the frequently asked questions, I wanted to go over the fact that right now for MRC, when you're choosing that flip date, when you're having that communication with county boards and the providers and choosing that flip date, that right now the system allows only a flip date for the county board to choose based upon the individual's waiver spans within that site. Tomorrow night, it is Thursday. Tomorrow night we are getting that opened up, and it'll allow the county boards to choose any date that the providers and the county boards have agreed upon. If before that time you need a date change, you feel free to email MSS support and we can change it for you at that time until tomorrow night. Once we have tomorrow night, you'll be able to choose whatever date there is from that date for the future. Past dates. If something should happen, we've gotten this a lot already. If something should have happened, like we had some holidays in there where county boards and providers chose a date, but because of holidays, because of whatever happened, they couldn't get in on a day that date needed to be in there. So for example, they wanted a 2-1, but it was 2-4 when we got back into the office and everybody was like, oh, we missed it. The system does not allow past dates. It doesn't allow past date for a good reason, because what we don't want to get into is a provider who is already billed for DRA having to go back out all those claims, readjust, rebill once we get an MRC flip date. But if that date you truly need is 2/1, email us at MSS support. We can change it for you. We're going to look at it, make sure that if there is services that have been provided and billed, that you know that you have to get that backed out before they can rebill, because it'll be a new DBU range based upon MRC. So those things can happen. Also, there will be 3 reports that will be available for county boards and providers as well. So the first report that will be there is a report that just basically says, as a county board or as a provider, give me all the sites and individuals that I have that are currently DRA sites that have an MRC flip date. So that way you can see, as a county board, I have 7 sites in my county with an MRC flip date of this date, because we've already agreed on that. As a provider, I can pull up my provider and say, as a provider, how many sites that I am the MRC provider of already have a flip date. You can pull that and see that. We also have a report that'll come out that'll give you the specifications based upon the site. So the provider name, your projected hours, the actual hours, are you above or below the 3%? It gives you all of this. Are you at your max DBU? All this information in one report. You can pull that as well based upon site and provider and county. The third report that will come out is an individual base. So it breaks it down by individual. So we have the 3 reports, base it down by overall, what do we have sitting out there and have they flipped? The second report will base it down on site. So the overall site as a whole. The third report will break it down by site and by individual. So that way you can see each individual within that site on how many hours you've delivered, how many hours were actually projected for that individual, the DBU rate for those individuals within that site. So those are the 3 reports that we currently have in the field kind of going and getting ready to go out. The first report is actually good. I think it goes Thursday as well.
It's supposed to go Thursday as well.
The second report, we just got it out of UAT, so we just passed it through user acceptance testing, so it'll be ready to go on our next release and push. Right now, these are going to be links within MSS. Our plan is to get them into the data warehouse so that they'll be more accessible as well. But within MSS, there will be a link in there under that report section once you're on the site, and then it'll ask you if you want to search by overall county, overall provider, how do you want to search, and it'll break it down for you that way. What else is going on?
We'll be able to more easily choose a pass date for at least an MDA. If you say, hey, we need a pass date, we'll be able to do that without doing a data change, which is what we've been doing up to this point. We've been getting IT involved. We have updated some calculations a little bit here and there, going through, noticed a couple little funny things about how when things are entered in on schedule area, if you're not entering by month span, and you try to use frequency a month, there's some prorating involved there. So what happens is a normal month isn't, or an average month is not just 30 days, it's 31 point whatever. And so anytime you put in something as so many units per month, we did some prorating, which would add units here and there because you can't have a partial unit. So we're urging people to put that in month by month, and we're working on another way to have MRC look at that differently. It's going to be a lot of different coding. So that's going to be coming up in the future. I'm trying to think. I know we've been testing things for the release, and we've been giving information about what else we need updated. So we're continuing to go on and update and try to make the system work better and more efficient. Anything that anybody brings up to us, we go ahead and look into it. So if you do run into any issues, we have had several sites ask to start in the past. We have had several sites that said, hey, we picked this date and we're really not ready. So if you have any sites that you've worked with the county, you've decided on a date, and then the site you're not sure about it because the site, say it's a little, starts to become unpredictable, or you had some new people moving around or something like that, and you're saying, hey, I'm not really ready to go March 1st. Then let us know. What we do is we can change a date that's been set. We've been changing them out to just be a year in the future, and that way, when you are ready to go and determine a date within the next year, we can go ahead and update that date. But you just have to notify the department because we can change those. And that's the MSS support email.
Okay, we'll get into some of the frequently asked questions. So these are questions that we received a lot of or just received something out of the blue. And some of these questions pertain to a whole different aspect of what happens in the system. So one of the main questions, and we just hit some of the highlight, really asked questions that really were puzzling people or where people really needed to know an answer to. So one of the questions is, are county boards still required to submit a NICS or notification of individual change of service when a person is admitted to a hospital incarcerated? Yes, we have not changed the NICS process. So as a county board, you are still required to submit a NICS to the department when somebody is incarcerated, when somebody goes to the hospital, when somebody is in an ICF, when somebody is in IF, whenever those waiver services need to be stopped. So the payment of the pause will be suspended to prevent the unauthorized waiver claims. But the claims for your ADL and your AQL, which is your HPC on-site on-call, will be permitted as long as the person was not a resident of the ICF or nursing facility. So it goes back to those making sure you're putting in your non-billable days, because you should know that Jessica was in an ICF during that time and it wasn't something that I should be billing for. So, but for hospital jails, remember, they're still a resident of their home. They're coming back. They're not leaving. They're not fully admitted and staying where they're going to be. So they're coming back. I'll let Brian talk about this one because this is his realm of things.
So when should a person be removed from the MSS system as a result of admitted to hospital or being incarcerated? If the county board, if you go in and you say, I can adjust this schedule because they're only going to be in there for a week, and then we can adjust the cost for that month, and basically they have no costs attributed for that week, then you can do it that way. If it's going on long enough, you may have to, depending on if there's a waiver span end or begin, stuff like that, you may have to move them out of the site. But if you can manage it with just taking them out of the patterns and taking the services out for that, even if they're going to be gone for a month or 2 months, if you don't have any costs attributed to them for those 2 months, then their costs for that month should be zero, and you should be able to handle that way. What we do end up with problems with is sometimes, hey, we expect them to come back, and for some reason they don't. Then we have to do retroactive changes. So again, it's kind of like similar to the DRA is, if you can handle it with a schedule change, you handle it with a schedule change. But if it's going to be a longer period of time, you have to weigh, maybe I should move them out because I know it's going to be 3 months and I can move them out, and then I'll move them back in when they come back, if they do in fact come back to this site. But remember, the only thing we're doing is taking the costs that have been projected for that person in that span and spread it across all the days that we can bill in those monthly up to month spans. So if you take that, you reduce their costs, then they only get the bill for the days that you can actually do that, then they're still attributed the appropriate amount of costs. Does that make sense, what I said, or am I losing people? Hopefully not. Okay, so may an HPC agency submit daily billing unit claim and on a day when a person is receiving community or residential respite? And the answer to that is yes. An ADL or AQL claim may be paid on the same day a person is receiving community respite, unit partial day or residential respite. Our thoughts there is it should be scheduled in the calendar and everything else so that if they're really going to have some community respite that day, that their total for the month is going to be lower because they really are getting those other services, so that you wouldn't have those accounted for in HPC. The same goes for respite days. The only ones are, and it includes respite days when a person is receiving waiver-funded respite in an ICF. So they actually have to be admitted into the ICF, not just there on waiver respite for you not to be able to bill. So it is okay if it's there on waiver respite paid for by the waiver. Once cost projection has been finalized, can it be changed for any reason other than move in and move out, stop, start, program variations? Nothing changes how you currently, hopefully, will go about being proactive about changing cost projections. So in today's world, with the DRA, if you knew, hey, this person did just get hurt, they're not going to be able to go to their day program, wherever they go during the day, and it looks like it's going to be several weeks, there's nothing that prevents you from going in at that point and changing the cost projection and being proactive. Nothing prevents you from being able to do that the way you always have. This is hopefully going to reduce anything where we have a small change that you bring back and say, oh, wait a minute, I better let the county know that I need a little additional half hour, or, oh, we had one extra doctor appointment this month. I don't know we accounted for those hours. This gives you that wiggle room to not have to worry about those kind of things. But those things that you know are going to change what the person's needs are and the hours of service that they receive that are outside of a 3% margin, then yes, there's nothing wrong with going ahead and getting that reported ahead of time. Then authorizations may be changed, however, for minor fluctuations in the day-to-day service needs, where hopefully we can get rid of that having to do as many changes and really only do them when they make sense and when they're really going to benefit the person. Does the requirement for providers to enter actual hours delivered within 30 calendar days impact the provider's ability to submit claims? And the answer to that is no. We're requiring you to tell us what hours you provided. When you upload that bill file to bill in MBS, that's still back on you. You still have 350 days to get that to us. And we ask for those additional days so that we can then process it through our process and get it to Medicaid. So it's the same thing. You could have filled out the DRA, but if you didn't submit that bill file, as long as you hit it before the 350th day, then you're fine. Example, you go in and you've done a month, you've billed for January, and you're in September and you realize, you know what? We just found out this person worked an extra 5 hours. And, oh, those 5 hours might have put us within that 3%. Nothing goes back to prevent you from putting those hours in, updating the actuals for that month, and going forward and rebilling. If it still remains that you're under, or you put the new hours in, it goes over, we're not going to make any changes to the cost projection at that point, but you still can update the actuals and adjust your billing for that time. Does that make sense? What type of documentation is required when a provider is seeking an adjustment to CPT and they're delivered more than 3% of the projected hours? We didn't prescribe it. However, the provider must demonstrate that the additional hours were needed as a result of one or more people in the home requiring additional supports. And examples of situations necessitating increased hours include, but are not limited to, day of work program closures, illnesses, injuries, requiring increased hands-on care, and changes in behavior status, etc. So those are just some of them, but then those are some of the big major ones that change things by more than 3%. Unacceptable examples are additional staff on site for training, unauthorized on behalf of services, other reasons not related to individuals' needs. What happens if a county board or a provider fails to comply with requirements? Concerns with county board's compliance with projecting costs for the full 12 months, requesting prior authorization as soon as identifying the cost to meet a person's needs exceeding the DDP funding range, adjusting the CPT upon receiving justification from a provider, etc., should be reported to DODD's Office of Provider Standards and Review. So if there's a problem that you're presenting things and the county board refuses to go ahead and deal with something, or if you know somebody needs a PA but they don't seem to be getting that done, all those issues, they need to be dealt with by Provider Standards and Review. Concerns with a provider's failure to enter actuals in 30 calendar days of the end of the month, or in a timely report, or to timely report changes in a person's status that require additional support for hours should be reported to the board's regulatory division or Ohio Provider Standards and Review, Office of Provider Standards and Review. So in other words, if a provider isn't meeting up to their requirements within the rule of reporting that stuff, then the county board, who can do provider compliance type reviews, or OPSR, who also does provider compliance reviews, can look at that and follow through with that on the normal regulatory process. A special regulatory review may be conducted, as we know, at any time with cause or reason. So those are the highlights, and we're going to open up for some questions. Do we have any way to receive questions via the YouTube chat so we can let some other people chime in and give us those questions if they come through the chat?
So one of the questions that we know we got a lot of, and we got some in our training that we did in January, was about how to bill upon a date of admission or date of discharge of an ICF nursing home. So just so you know, we didn't change anything like that. So when an individual is admitted into an ICF or nursing facility, both the facility and the waiver provider can bill for date of admission. It's the date of discharge that's different. The date of discharge, a facility cannot get paid for. So if I'm discharged today, the waiver provider will bill, but the facility will not and cannot. They will bill for the day prior. So just to keep that clear, so that way you know when you're looking at your non-billables, you know, the date of discharge is not a non-billable day. You can bill for that because at some point in time, Jessica's going to come home and you're going to have to provide services to Jessica if it's within that time frame of when you're authorized to provide services. Amy mentioned earlier in the beginning about the MRC work group that we have together. So what I've been trying to stress with this work group is, even if you're not a part of it, we have the MSS support email. If there's something you're seeing out there, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because we need to know it all, email us, tell us about it. Give us something to work with within that group and bring it to that group to say, hey, this is what we're hearing, this is what we're seeing. Currently, as of right now, we know of 4 sites that have already flipped in January. A couple of those sites already have actuals in, providers are billing. So we know it's working. We have, I think, another 16 to 17 sites that have flipped for February. So we know it's out there and working, but we're not hearing anything. So when you tell us about what's going on and what you're feeling, what you're seeing, make sure you're telling us what's good and bad. Because here's what happens. We have a flow in the system and it goes from A to D. So you have A, B, C, D going on, right? If you tell me D is horrible, I go ahead in there and I change A and B, which A and B worked great. The problem was with going from C to D. Well, I changed A and B to try to fix D because nobody told me A and B was good. So instead of fixing the solution of C and to D, I fixed A to B to make D work out because A flows to D, when I could have focused on what the flow from C to D. So I could have broke what was perfect and working great for everybody and still didn't, and fixed D, but now I broke your beginning part because I didn't know that was working properly. So make sure when you're letting us know what's going on, tell me all of it, tell us all of it. We need to know it all. Even if it's just, you know what, I don't like it because the Q looks funny. I don't know, just tell us. But don't forget to not say what's also good because we don't want to break what is working for you.
In other words, if you can tell us not only where the point is that seems to be a problem, but make sure you say everything's good up until this point. And when I do this, click this button, that's when I get the problem. So more explanation on a step-by-step basis really helps us pinpoint what's going on with the system, and it helps us troubleshoot a lot better than just, hey, I can't get my actual in. Okay, is the pop-up box not coming up, or is the link not there? Those are the kind of things that we spend a lot of time back and forth with people to say, hey, can you tell me exactly what's going on? I know, I was being a disembodied voice at that time.
So any questions from inside here? Anybody who's present? That's a good thing, right? Anything from the field?
From the chat. Okay. Just trying to give you think of anything else that's come through in MSS support. Most of our emails have been about the date. I'm in a site that's not an MRC site, and I picked a date. what I need to do to remove it. You don't have to, it's not gonna affect the site.
It doesn't reflect on our data as well, so you're good there.
When on the MSS application, I click on the MRC link and there are no options as far as numbers of hours for the site, is there a walkthrough somewhere to show how to actually submit the billing hours for each site?
So I did have some screenshots up there about where you would update the actuals, and we can go ahead and get something out just for billing. It's really very similar to the DRA, and once you know to click something that says enter actuals, which is a link at the top, but we'll go ahead and get something that's a little more clear. Maybe we can even send that out in one of the Memo Mondays, make it available. I don't know if there's anything in the RISE document.
There is, so a lot of the RISE document, if you haven't seen it yet, when you go to DODD's website, you'll go to dodd.ohio.gov, go down to county boards or providers, select DODD apps, and then you will go to the MSS little box and you'll hit more. Once you hit more there, you'll see under training, the MRC RISE training program. Our communications team did an awesome job at putting this together. It incorporates some of the PowerPoint that we've used today, along with some additional flows and workthroughs. It also involves a lot more of the FAQs, and kind of breaks the FAQs down based upon compliance. Just standard reviews of what the NICS is, what county boards are seeing, what providers are seeing. So it kind of breaks some of that down as well for you guys. But that RISE program also has the screenshots that you'll need. We're also building a technical piece that will go into that RISE program as well to technically pull out those specific screens that you see that you want to say where click here, enter here. So we'll be able to do that more as we get this more solid for you and be able to work through that.
And a link to that RISE, as of tomorrow night, will be put in MSS itself. So when you go to different pages, you'll see a link to the RISE training. That'll take you right there. To maybe give a little better answer to this specific question. So if you land on, when you first go in, you're gonna land on the projected cost page. If you click on the actuals tab up here, hopefully you can see that, then that's where you're gonna get the add actual span. And so when you hit add actual span, it'll do a pop-up just like DRA, and then once you've entered them, they'll be listed like this underneath the month once you expand the month. So you expand this month, you can see all the actuals that have been entered week by week underneath there. So hopefully that helps explain the specific question of where do I go to find the way to enter actuals. The other option, I wanted to show you the other page, which we had earlier in the slides, which is the projected cost page. So this is the projected cost page. If you've come here and CPT doesn't say complete, that means somebody's costs have not ended up in the MRC from cost projection, so something's still being pushed forward. In progress means you haven't put any actuals in. Once you check that monthly box, this will change to below, above, or within. And then these costs, the DB costs, if they get changed because you're below, they'll be listed in red. And you can see, we redacted the names, but here would be the names of the people and their contributions of costs. So you can see that across there, and you'll have to hit this little expand to get to that for each month.
We've also added waiver type to this field as well, so that you'll be able to see the waiver type each individual within that site is on, since you can have level 1 itself within an IO congregate waiver site.
Hopefully we can get some feedback if that answered that person's question. Okay. We're at that point where we've probably given you most of our input. We're still waiting to see if there's any other questions. Anybody have any other, even just comments or anything they'd like to provide at this point?
I would just say, I know I'm going to be on that work group, but I think hopefully we can maybe look at some of the systems and how they're working, and if there's any way to make it easier on folks. I know a lot of our providers have had concerns about, the adjusting claims and making sure that when the documentation is submitted to county boards, that the adjustments are made in CPT in a timely manner. Because I know that's the goal of this thing, right? Is to prevent these. I just had a provider yesterday tell me that they just got a request from the county board to go back and make an adjustment from 8 months ago.
Correct.
And so we're hoping that maybe there'll be some opportunities to make the systems do some of that work and not necessarily put it all on county boards and providers.
In other words, you're talking about maybe have the system when you're above to kick off some kind of request. We'll have to look at that in the future. I know that was one of the things we would have liked to put in here, but there's so many details around that and so many different factors. So we've got to kind of nail those down. So hopefully we can get some more of that in with that group.
Yeah,
And we can get some, I think at least with this concept, when we say you've got a month and we kind of put that timeline down and we're not letting, so let's say I have projected for the year, I've got my months in, I've been billing through the DBU. When I get outside that 60 days and there's an update and the county board changes the schedule, but they don't realize the schedule was actually 6 months past, in there 6 months past, and they go to do the cost projection finalization at authorization right now, and we also want to do it at finalization. This is going in tomorrow night. They'll get an alert that says, hey, did you know that you're putting costs in for this month, which is more than 60 days old? Did you mean to do that? Now, if they do that and it gets into MRC, it's not going to be reflected on here. There'll be another tab where we administratively can see it, but we're not going to push it through unless we've been contacted, unless we have had the explanation. So that piece we're still getting some fine tuning because we've got the mock-ups and trying to get that together. So that's not quite in there yet for the past stuff, and we really don't have enough sites in there to start worrying about 60 days past yet. However, that we're already working on that, and we'll see those, but we won't touch them unless we've been contacted to say, yeah, we really did need this change more than 60 days. So hopefully it'll prevent that something being updated without anybody knowing anything about it, because we will, at the first point, make sure it comes through MDA.
I want to address Debbie's concern first. I want to say I got to get in front of the camera. First, that's perfect. That's absolutely the concern, is we don't want to just leave boards and providers out there and say, figure this out. So that's great that you're on that work group for MRC, because there's a document, a shared document that DODD providers developed a long time ago about best practices with DRA. And that group is going to put together best practices for MRC. And you guys are going to work through some of those examples. So this is, it won't be just great, have a great day. And we want to funnel those questions through this group about when boards don't respond to make changes timely and create issues for providers, and when providers don't share information with boards timely so we can make those changes. So your work group will be on top of that and will help develop those best practices and share that as a document, and we can do some training statewide on that document too. So that's absolutely exactly what we want to do.
Did we have another question over here from the chat?
Yes. Will there continue to be more, no, sorry, that's the wrong one. Can I run a report to show how many hours under or over for that particular site?
You will be able to once the reports are up and available. So that'll be report 2, which just got out of UAT development. So hopefully within the next few weeks, we should be able to get that into production. And you'll be able to see that site, if it's over, under, and by how many hours. If you want to see it individual based, that's the third report that's coming right behind the second one. We should have that within probably a week or 2 behind that second one to say individually, are you over or under the hours projected plus or minus the 3%. So we will be able to have all that information and data for you.
And then if you're looking at by site, remember, if you come in and on the projected page, if it's been completed for the month, you'll see if you're over or under. So this is per site, you will be able to see it here. The report will be able to bring you that across several sites.
When will it be expected to use the MRC and no longer use the MSS?
You will always still use MSS. MRC is a part of MSS. It's DRA that you will no longer use once you've determined an MRC flip date.
And we need to have that by the end of this year. And if we already know that there are some sites that they're asking for January or February next year, because of that's just a naturally reoccurring cost period because of people's waiver spans. But we're going to ask that you have us those dates by the end of the year so we know when you're flipping. We're going to run that report towards the end of the year and find out how many sites don't have flip dates, and we'll be calling people.
Right, and so what we've said broadly is January 1st of 2020, we want to know what those plan dates are. Again, part of this MRC work group is that we're going to gauge how well this is going and how far we may need to extend that. We've made a commitment to say we'll make sure that we can roll this out as smoothly as possible. So that work group will give us some feedback too about what's happening in the field. And if we need to adjust that, we're willing to do that too. But as of now, January 1st, 2020, we want to know the dates of the intended flip, okay?
How will we put on time? Hmm? If that's it for everything now, then
Yep.
we'll go ahead and close this session out. We have another one this afternoon, same subject matter, and we'll be available again on the web. And we're going to have those on the YouTube. Videos are going to be posted on the website, right? On Facebook. Sorry, on Facebook, on the department's Facebook page.
Thank you all for coming and thanks for joining.